This game is hot garbage. I remember when a bunch of content creators were hyping up Star Resonance after the original Blue Protocol shut down. Everyone was saying that this was the second chance the franchise needed, that with all the changes coming, it was going to be a blast. And honestly, I was excited too. I thought we were finally getting a solid MMO again. Something with good action combat, a deep life-skilling system, maybe even housing, and a great story to tie it all together. But then the game released, and what we got was something that looked like it should have came out in 2011. It's rough, it's dated, and it feels like a project that never evolved past its early concept stage. That's when I started digging and realized Tencent didn't just buy the IP, they had to completely remake the game from the ground up. Different developer, different systems, even a new monetization model. And as it is Tencent, they even added a gacha system to it, which I looked it up, and I don't think the original Blue Protocol had a gacha system. So it really makes you wonder, did Tencent rebuild this game just to squeeze as much money out of players as possible before it inevitably dies again? Hopefully I'm wrong. The story and storytelling of Blue Protocol Star Resonance is bad, not just because of what's written, but because of how it's delivered. It's a combination of weak writing, clunky pacing, poor presentation, and inconsistent production values that make the entire narrative experience feel cheap and unengaging. Let's start with the writing itself. The story tries to follow the classic hero's journey formula: mysterious world, forgotten history, chosen savior, but it does absolutely nothing new with it. Every plot point feels recycled from older RPGs, and none of it lands emotionally. You're introduced to characters who talk in vague cliches about destiny and friendship, but there's no reason to care about them because they're one-dimensional. They don't grow, their motivations are thin, and their dialogue is so bloated with filler lines that it feels like you're wasting your time. And that brings us to pacing. Star Resonance is unbearably slow in how it tells its story. Text scrolls at a snail's pace, and you can't click through it to speed it up. It feels like a punishment for wanting to pay attention. Instead of tightening scenes or focusing on meaningful interactions, the game floods you with pointless dialogue that says nothing. You'll sit through minutes of characters repeating the same sentiment in slightly different words, all while nothing actually happens. It kills momentum and makes even key story moments feel tedious. Then there's the presentation, which might be the worst offender. The game constantly switches between voiced and unvoiced dialogue, often mid-conversation. One line will be fully voice acted, the next will be silent text boxes with the same characters standing still. It's jarring, lazy, and completely destroys immersion. The inconsistency makes the whole thing feel unfinished, as if they ran out of money halfway through the recording. The cutscene direction doesn't help either. Scenes are short, abrupt, and often pointless. You'll get a short clip of a character walking into frame, and then it cuts to a static portrait in visual novel layout. Sometimes cutscenes end so abruptly that it feels like the game crashed or needs to throw you back into gameplay mid-sentence. There's no rhythm, there's no cinematic flow, no sense of continuity between one scene and the next. Visually, the storytelling suffers from stiff animations and poor facial expression. Characters do move their eyes and mouth, but I think they added it after the fact because it looks like they didn't want to animate it, so it just looks really off. When a major event happens, a betrayal, a loss, a revelation, it's delivered with the emotional weight of reading subtitles over a rock. The disconnect between the dialogue and animation makes it impossible to care about what's going on. Ultimately, Star Resonance's story fails because they just don't respect the player's time or attention. It drags, it meanders, and it never rewards you for paying attention. Combined with awkward pacing and inconsistent production and shallow writing, the storytelling feels like an afterthought, a placeholder narrative wrapped around a monetization system. Next, we have the combat in Blue Protocol Star Resonance, which should be the game's biggest selling point. It promises fast-paced action melee, flashy finishers, and skillful counters. Instead, it consistently undercuts itself. Not because the ideas are bad, but because the execution feels half-baked. The core problem is a disconnect between design ambition and mechanical follow-through. Systems exist on paper, dodges that rewards counters, form switches, resource management, but they rarely come together in a way that feels crisp, responsive, or rewarding. Attacks lack weight, animation transitions are awkward, and timing windows feel unforgiving when the code or network doesn't cooperate. It turns what should be satisfying into a chore. The second issue is consistency. Some reviewers and players find moments of real fun. Close range melee plays better, perfect dodges can feel powerful, and certain classes like Stormblade have big visually impressive burst windows. Yet those highs are patchy and often interrupted by clunky animation or janky transitions between forms and skills. When a game gives you a flashy ultimate or a multi-jump combo, you expect the build-up and payoff to feel seamless. In Star Resonance, you often watch a great-looking animation that doesn't land correctly on enemies, or you'll be thrown out of a combo because an input didn't register cleanly. That inconsistency makes it hard to trust the system enough to master them. Technical problems also amplify design flaws. The combat's reliance on precise timing and iframes makes it especially vulnerable to latency, frame drops, and animation stutters. When your class requires split-second dodges for counters or to preserve a resource chain, any hitch in frame rate or input responsiveness turns skillful into frustrating. Those technical shortfalls make a mechanically interesting combat loop feel thin and unreliable. Another major disappointment is dungeon and enemy designs. Combat encounters should scaffold and highlight mechanics. They should reward good timing, punish mistakes, and introduce new threats that make your toolkit feel meaningful. Instead, dungeons are repetitive with spongy enemies and recycled mechanics that don't force you to use the depth your class offers. When boss fights evolve into long health bars with predictable windows, flashy class abilities cease to feel impactful. They just speed up monotonous chore. That mismatch between encounter design and character kit wastes the potential of the combat system. And then I come back to how it looks. Running through the Goblin Dungeon, and then you see these boulders roll towards you look like it was released back in 2009. It just looks terrible. Finally, systems around progression and monetization ruin the joy of combat. Range-based stat rolls, heavy time gating, and incentives to spend on convenience turn repeated play sessions into depressed gambling loops rather than anything enjoyable. When the path to meaningful power is gated behind daily caps or randomized drops, the player's focus shifts from how can I play better to how do I farm more efficiently or pay less. That undermines the whole point of action combat, to get better at the game because improving skill is intrinsically rewarding. In Star Resonance, that reward loop is muddied, so the combat never quite becomes the virtuous cycle it aspires to be. The combat could have been the title's anchor, but execution issues, inconsistent animation, and responsiveness, poor encounter design, and a grindy monetization overlay leave it disappointing rather than defining. The flashes of potential make the letdown worse. You can clearly see what the game could have been, which only highlights how much was left unfinished. The user interface and navigation systems in Star Resonance are among the weakest parts of the entire experience, and they drag down what little fun the game has left. The UI feels like it was designed for a completely different kind of game, more like a mobile MMO than a full-fledged PC title. Menus are cluttered, unresponsive, and unintuitive. Important information like quest markers, stat breakdowns, and gear attributes are buried under too many clicks, and the interface constantly interrupts gameplay flow. And you can't even resize or move the UI around, which left things too small or too big and prevented my friends from creating a HUD that best suited them. But the worst offender is the auto-pathing system. In theory, it's supposed to make navigation easier. You click a quest objective or a location and your character runs there automatically. In practice, it's infuriating. I had one experience where I was trying to pass to a location nearby, but instead of going straight there, the system decides that it's better if I teleport back to the entrance of the zone and then run all the way back, even though it's much further. And then there's the fact that you need to be mounted to actually autopath, which is very annoying when you find yourself in a weird spot and have to move. What should be a convenience feature turns into an obstacle course of poor coding. It's so unreliable they end up running everywhere manually, which defeats the purpose of the system entirely. Then there's the lag, especially during the world boss. The UI and HUD start stuttering, inputs get delayed, and ability icons sometimes don't even respond. You can even see your ping spike, your camera lock up, and enemies frozen in place, making you wonder if you're about to die. This kind of technical mess makes the whole game feel unstable. and unfinished, as if the UI and pathing systems were never properly optimized for large-scale encounters. And then we have the developer's choice on hotkey placements. I bring this up because I was doing the Goblin Boss dungeon for the first time, and when I picked up that shield, the game told me to press the tilde button to do the action. Who the fuck decides that the tilde key is the best key for an action? Yes, I know we can change the hotkey, but I didn't know that the tilde key was the default key for special actions, so obviously I fumbled that mechanic my first time through. Why wasn't it F or something? My tiny keyboard literally doesn't have a tilde button. It's the small design choices like that which perfectly sum up my problem with Star Resonance. Everything feels clunky, awkward, and poorly thought out, like a game that wants to be modern but keeps tripping over its systems. When even basic things like movement, UI navigation, and keybinds turn to sources of frustration, it's hard to stay immersed in anything else. The more you play, the more it feels like the game is actively working against you, laying inconvenience on top of lag and inconsistency. At some point you stop fighting enemies and start fighting the interface itself. And that's when you realize just how broken the foundation really is. Star Resonance is a game that feels like it never really understood what it wanted to be. It tries to capture the magic that Blue Protocol once hinted at, that blend of anime aesthetic, action combat, and MMO world building, but somewhere along the way, it lost all of its identity. What we got instead is a hollow shell of what could have been something special. Everything from the story to the gameplay systems feels half-baked or poorly stitched together. The narrative is slow, awkward, and emotionally empty. The combat looks flashy but feels disconnected and weightless. The UI is messy, the lag is brutal, and even simple features like autopathing or keybinds feel like an afterthought. Add on the randomized gear, daily time gaze, and the gacha-inspired monetization, and it's hard not to feel like this was designed first as a revenue machine and second as an actual game. What sucks is that Star Resonance doesn't have to be this way. The world it borrows from had so much potential. A chance to evolve from Blue Protocol's mistakes and create something meaningful. Instead, it repeats every misstep while adding new ones. And as someone who genuinely wanted this to succeed, it's sad to see the remnants of a great idea turn into a lifeless pseudo-gacha game. This game is bad, not because it's unplayable, but because it's uninspired. It's a reminder that good visuals and nostalgic art direction can't save a game without heart, polish, or purpose. Tencent may have bought the name, but they couldn't buy the soul that made Blue Protocol worth remembering. And Star Resonance proves that sometimes not every franchise deserves a second chance. Thanks for watching, like, comment, subscribe. My name's Bensuka. I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.